This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
The local regional sports networks that account for so much of baseball's revenue because the national television contracts aren't quite as robust as they are, say, with the NBA or particularly with the NFL. The regional sports networks said, we want you to play games at home. And that desire of the RSNs and the $1 billion+ that they're going to give to broadcast games this season was a hugely motivating factor in baseball trying to go to this city-by-city plan.
What's that old saying? Follow the money, ladies and gentlemen. Josh Hennig here on the warm-up, 97.3 ESPN. Of course, text board is open for you at 609-403-0973. A lot to get into today. The NHLPA is voting on the potential of this 24-team playoff and the play-in games when it comes to the NHL playoffs. We are a week away from the NBA officially announcing all of the plans and protocols for them to return this summer. We know that Major League Baseball has been given a set of questions from the Major League Baseball Players Association of what next. And today on the show, I'm very excited to tell you all that Jim Rooney will be joining me at 1:25, the son of Dan Rooney. Jim has a new book out, A Different Way to Win. Dan Rooney's story from Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. Obviously, there's been some expansion changes to the Rooney Rule this week, so we'll get into all of that and more with Jim Rooney today here on the warm-up. As I mentioned, the text board is open, 609-403-0973. And I wanted to play that specific clip for you that was on the Woj podcast. Jeff Passan talking about how the regional sports network's money has been a major factor in what's going to happen moving forward. And whether we like it or not, a lot of the things that happen moving forward, whether it's with baseball, basketball, or hockey, is going to come down to money. The money that these sports could potentially lose are numbers that the regular guy like you and me can't wrap our heads around. I mean, maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I have trouble wrapping my head around tens of billions of dollars personally. But maybe that's just me. It's a lot of zeros. I got to count them all up. When we're talking about sports coming back this year, and we're going to see it, in what capacity is going to be, in what format is going to be in, whatever it is, it's going to be different. And we can't overlook the fact that this is a situation that money is going to have a huge factor in. And that's going to be the driving force. Because at the end of the day, whether you're the NBA, the NHL, or Major League Baseball, you are a business. And I saw this tweet from Jeff Passan last night, and I couldn't help but scratch my head a little bit. He put out on Twitter, he says, as teams around baseball weigh pay cuts, the Minnesota Twins and the St. Louis Cardinals have proven themselves model organizations in how they treat their employees. Both have committed to keep their full staffs at a full pay through the end of June, sources tell ESPN. Passan goes on to say, there have been a lot of dark moments for team employees this week, especially with the Los Angeles Angels organization furloughing a significant portion of their baseball operations staff. And of course, we know in Philadelphia, the Phillies have tried to keep everybody employed. A lot of baseball teams, a lot of basketball and hockey teams, they've been, cutting people's pay, furloughing certain employees. Obviously, every organization is different. But it only emphasizes the fact is we enter Memorial Day weekend, traditionally a weekend where a lot of us are watching the NBA conference finals, a weekend where we feel like this is the unofficial start of the baseball season. Memorial Day weekend for a lot of us, has a lot of memories when it comes to watching baseball, playing baseball, maybe going to baseball games over the weekend. A lot of those daytime baseball games, Memorial Day, have been a staple of a lot of our lives. And on a day like today, I believe that there is hope. I believe that we can be optimistic of sports to return. But the way it's going to return is going to be a maximization of how much money can be made. Do not overlook the reality that for these professional sports leagues, money is what it's going to come down to. The reason why the NHL is proposing the format that they are is because of the fact that in the NHL, they have to depend on that TV money, or else the TV money is going to at least bridge the gap for everything else. So as a result, the NHL has to have a 24-team tournament, not because it's ideal logistically, not because it's ideal because they want to make sure that everyone gets a fair shake. No. This has to do with one thing and one thing only. This has to do with television, with the TV money. You see, the NBA and the NHL, while they already started their seasons, the majority of their seasons are a ramp up to the postseason. Let's be realistic. A game that happens in November is not that important. And in fact, with the NBA seasons starting in the middle of football season, you have hockey and the NBA for October, November, and December. So 3 months out of your calendar, the majority of the sports world is not watching you. They're not paying attention to you. The fever pitch of basketball and hockey starts rolling around for many of us in January, February, and March. And those 3 months are a ramp up to the playoffs. So a lot of this 24-team proposal has to do with specifically making sure you can maximize the dollars, maximize the money that they can get in terms of advertising, in terms of what they owe the television networks. And as you heard Passon say, the regional sports networks are what is dictating some of what Major League Baseball is doing. It's easier for the regional sports network to broadcast games if the games are in their home parks. Now, it may not be logistically the best bubble scenario. It may logistically not be the best scenario in terms of quote-unquote social distancing, because if you're in your hometown, there may be some temptation for said players to go out to different establishments that may not have the same level of shielding as the baseball facilities. And there should be a proposal with a question from the Major League Baseball Players Association to Major League Baseball saying, what about testing? You had 67 pages. And as Jeff Passon says, none of those pages address probably people's biggest concern.
For the thoroughness of those 67 pages in MLB's health and safety document, there was not a single mention of what happens if there's an outbreak. Because I don't think they want to peg themselves.
They don't have to. That's right.
They don't want to back themselves into a corner to have to do something because we don't know what the country is going to look like. We don't know what the country is going to look like next week. I don't know what the country looks like today.
Just think about that for a moment. Literally what they're telling you. And these are guys who cover sports. Their job is to report. give you the news, give you information. Part of the reason why baseball isn't giving out certain information, part of the reason why the NHL and the NBA is not giving us certain information is because it's in their best interests to make sure in the process of maximizing the money they can make, it is in their best interest to not give out too much information. So along the way, they don't have to backtrack on anything. And I think that's where, listen, whether you think sports coming back is a good idea, a bad idea, whether you like a 2014 postseason proposal, whether you like the idea of maybe a round-robin play-in between seeds 7 through 12 in the NBA, whether you like the idea of baseball doing a 135-game sprint like Bryce Harper stated, or another proposal that says only 81 games, whatever your feelings and beliefs are about what is going to happen, you're just going to have to accept it if you want sports back. Normal is out the window. Normal is done. It's over for right now. We have to accept the fact that all of this is going to take some sacrificing. And while it seems like NBA players are much more willing to open to sacrificing than maybe the baseball players are, and obviously they have their reasons, and we'll get into that in a little bit, I find the NHL situation very, very enlightening. And here's why. And again, the text board is open, 609-403-0973, to get on the conversation. The NHL's primary television partner is NBC. NBC lost a huge chunk of their television programming this summer. That chunk of television programming was the Olympics. So you have a month worth of programming that was supposed to be on NBC, NBC Sports Network, that was supposed to be bleeding over onto networks like USA, CNBC. You had all of this programming set aside just for the Olympics. And now there's no Olympics. So now what happens? Well, you got to fill it with something. And we know a lot of television networks had to shut down production when it came to television shows. So how many of the shows that a network like NBC has to commit to now fill that they didn't get to finish in the spring? We know a lot of the shows that are having finales right now on many different networks, they're having to get creative. For example, a top-rated show like The Blacklist on NBC, they didn't finish filming the final episode. So they got creative, and they went out there, and they put the storyboards on television with animated versions of the real-life characters for the scenes that were not finished filming. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about people having to fill content. So for the NHL, they can go to NBC now and say, we can give you content. And we're going to give you content in multiple cities. Let's not forget, if you expand this across the board, you're talking about including Montreal, the two New York teams, Toronto. You're talking about including Vegas, Dallas. You're talking about including Chicago. You're talking about including a lot of cities that may or may not have been in the conversation for the postseason otherwise. And in the purpose of including those cities, you're getting those television markets, those eyeballs. The NHL's proposal to the Players Association has less to do about anything except for maximizing dollars. And since there's going to be no fans until further notice, and because organizations are planning for a world without fans. These organizations have to find ways to maximize the advertising dollars and not have to do any IOUs when it comes to these other organizations. The NBCs, the ESPN, Turner Sports, Fox. You don't have to give them money back. That'd be a mess. Can you imagine that IOU check from the NBA or from the NHL or from Major League Baseball if they don't have games this summer? And it was on the Woj podcast that Woj brought up the new financial reality for the NBA without fans.
They've got a collective bargaining agreement and a revenue, essentially a 50-50 revenue split that doesn't work if 40% of the owner's revenue is gone from arenas, from fans. And so already, and I reported about this a little bit the other day, they're already talking about what empty arenas might look like. And Silver started to prepare the players for that.
They're preparing the players for a reality without fans. Is this ideal? No. Is this what we really, really want? No. But if you want sports back, you have to understand that these leagues are going to do whatever it takes to make sure they maximize their dollars. You may not like the DH in the National League. You may not like 24 teams making the playoffs in the NHL, which frankly is a little ridiculous. I'll give you that. It's excessive. You may not like a play-in tournament between the 7 and 12 seeds in each conference. You might not like a round-robin tournament. It may be different. It may be weird. But as we sit here on the weekend of Memorial Day, as we sit here knowing that there's no conference finals this weekend, there's no daytime baseball to relax with a drink in your hand and kick back on the patio with your television and watch, or on your smart device on the beach. As we know that we live in a world where for the next several weeks, the only sports that you have on television is NASCAR, golf, and UFC, and Bundesliga soccer, if I pronounce that properly. That's all you got. And we know people are watching. We know the record numbers that Skins game with Rory McIlroy had a couple of weeks ago. 4.2 million viewers. I mean, good grief. We know the UFC over 3 nights had some top 5 all-time numbers in terms of viewership for MMA fights. We know that the last 2 NASCAR events, the one in the afternoon on Sunday and then the one, I believe it was, Wednesday night or Thursday night, the NASCAR race was on. Those got great viewership numbers. People are starving to watch things. So I ask you at 609-403-0973, are you ready for a world that's going to look different when it comes to your favorite teams? When the Sixers do play again, when the Phillies do play again, when the Flyers are back, are you ready for that new reality? 609-403-0973. Tom from the Villas chimes in. Tom says, I want sports to come back as much as the next guy. But other than baseball, I don't think I can get into sports with no fans. Do you think viewership will drop without fans in the stands? That's Tom from the Villas. You know, Tom, it's very interesting because it depends on who you ask. You look at a sport like WWE, which is not really a sport, it's sports entertainment. It's an athletic-based drama. Their viewership has dipped significantly without people in the stands. Their viewership has took a huge hit since WrestleMania without people in the stands. WrestleMania did very well in terms of viewership, as it usually does. But since then, it struggled. Their viewership across all 3 of their platforms have struggled. Monday Night Raw, WWE NXT on Wednesday, and then was it SmackDown on Friday? I lose track of which one's which at times. Now, for someone like me, I find it fascinating what they're doing, how they're making this work without people in the stands. But for the casual viewer, they are not watching. Now, you mentioned baseball, Tom. How many times have we watched a Phillies game or any baseball game where half the ballpark is empty? How many times have we seen a baseball game where the Phillies are playing the Marlins, 12:30 in the afternoon, and nobody is there? There might be 1,000 people. So you're right, Tom. For baseball, there is a level of when you look around and you say, you know what? I don't know if this is that big a deal. I've seen this before. Because we have. We've all seen baseball games with people out, not in the stands. But we haven't seen it as much with the other sports. Unless you're watching a Memphis Grizzlies versus Minnesota Timberwolves game, or unless you're watching a Arizona Coyotes versus, I'm just trying to think of a random team that doesn't have a great name, Columbus Blue Jackets, right? If you are at the home game for the Coyotes, there might not be a sold-out arena, right? There might not be a sold-out arena for the Memphis Grizzlies when they host the Minnesota Timberwolves, right? So that is going to take some getting used to. And I think you ask a great question, Tom. Will viewership drop without fans in the stands? I think for sports like NASCAR and golf, most people don't care about the fans for those events because unless it's the Masters, which is moved all the way to November, unless it's a major event that you're used to fans being in the background, involved in the energy of the event, you will not miss it too much. And I think that, for example, the UFC, what they did with their events in Jacksonville, when NASCAR is done with their events, they're doing a great job at giving you camera angles that don't show you the empty seats. So you can get away with certain aspects of this. But Tom, you ask a great question. Will there be a drop in viewership with no fans in the stands? I am going to say right now, no, for this reason. I think there is such a thirst and hunger that by the time the NBA and baseball and the NHL get up and running this summer, and I think that we all can agree that that time frame is probably early to mid to late July is what we're assuming they're aiming for. I think by then, some of the people who might have tuned out originally are going to stay tuned in because at this point they're used to there not being fans in the stands for other events, for other things going on. But it's a great question. I can't guarantee you, though, that everyone is going to watch. We know that sports gambling has been ridiculous with UFC, with Korean baseball, and with other sports live, but that doesn't always equal viewership. They're not one and the same. But it's a great question by Tom in the Villas. Keep a text coming, 609-403-0973. Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget the 97.3 ESPN mobile app brought to you by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Coming up next, Jim Rooney, his new book, A Different Way to Win, the story about his father, Dan Rooney, from the Super Bowls to the Rooney Rule. That's next right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app.
The long-term benefit that baseball gets from playing this year, from giving people something to look at every single day, from bringing sports back is a big-time motivating factor in what it does. And it's why I don't think that either the league or the players are going to lay down and not try to get this thing at least across the line to spring training.
That was Jeff Passan on the Woes podcast, where they talked a lot about, what's going on with baseball and the NBA moving forward. 609-403-0973 is the text board to get on the conversation. Listen, there is a motivation for all of these sports to come back. It's just a lot of questions of what on earth it's going to look like. And it's not going to be normal. And I think Tom from the Villas in the last segment on the text board at 609-403-0973 asked an excellent question. What does that look like? And are people going to be okay with how that looks? And I don't really think I have 100% an answer for you. And I think the reason why I'm 100% answer is because I think that everyone's situation is different. Everyone's situation when it comes to things such as viewership. I don't know, as Jeff Passan said, I don't know what tomorrow is going to look like. I don't know what next week is going to look like. I can't guarantee any level of viewership. I can tell you what things are trending at right now, but I can't guarantee you what that looks like next week or the week after. I have theories about what it'll look like, and I think that's where, whether it's myself on this microphone, reporters like Jeff Passan and Adrian Wojnarowski or Mike Gill on the Sports Bash, or any of us, anybody looking at this situation cannot guarantee you anything. We can't promise you anything. What we can promise you is if the sports are out there, that they're going to test everybody, and they're going to go out there and play a game. When it comes to the fans, listen, the attendance is a big deal when it comes to revenue, and we can't deny that. But it was Sal Paolantonio on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill that talked about attendance and how attendance is not what we think it is. This was Sal Paolantonio with Mike Gill on the Sports Bash earlier this month when he talked about the percentage of people who actually go to NFL games. Oh, well, it might help if I actually hit that button and then hit this button. All right, here we go.
In the National Football League, only 7% of NFL fans attend an NFL game in their lifetime. Let me repeat that. Only 7% of NFL fans attend an NFL game in their lifetime. 93% of NFL fans consume NFL football on television their entire life.
That was Sal Paolantonio on the Sports Bash just a couple weeks ago. By the way, Sal Pal will be back with Mike Gill today at 3 o'clock on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. But Paolantonio laid it out for you right there. In their lifetime, only 7% of NFL fans actually will go to a game. That's incredible. So if you apply that to the other sports, and we know that there's more games in the other sports, so we know that that number's probably, I would say it's double. All right, let's round it off. Let's make it a nice flat number. So if only 7% of NFL fans in their lifetime ever attend a game, and because there's more games in baseball and basketball and hockey, right? You have 41 home games in basketball and hockey. You have 81 home games in baseball. So let's just throw it up there. There's only 8 home games. So let's say 20% of all fans who are NBA, NHL, and baseball fans ever go to a game. That's still saying that 80% are watching on television. If you feel like that 20% is a little low, fine, I'll give you 30%. But that's still 2/3 of fans never go to the game. So when people ask about what is it going to be like with no fans in the stands, I ask you, what is it going to be like if there are people watching? Those are two totally different things. Fans in the stands versus people at the events. And if it's as Sal Paolantonio said, if only 7% of fans in their lifetime actually go to a game for the NFL, and if we project that out to baseball, basketball, and hockey, There may not be fans in the stands when they come back, but people will be watching on television. That's my answer. Tom Navilis here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. Joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Jim Rooney, the son of Dan Rooney. Excited to have him on. He's got a brand new book out, and this week with the Rooney Rule coming to fruition, it's a great time to talk about one of the pillars of the NFL. And Jim joins us now on 97.3 ESPN. Jim, how you doing today?
Josh, it's good to be with you. Always like being in Atlantic City.
I'm really glad to have you as well because of the fact that we do have a lot of Steeler fans in our area, so it's not a foreign thing to talk about the Steelers and to talk about the Rooney family. And before we get into, the book and your father and everything, I wanted to start with, talk a little bit about, what went into this project. Because from what I understand, this was almost a 3-year project that you embarked upon to even write this.
Right. So we actually started about, while my father was still alive, we were going to do something for a business journal, maybe the Harvard Business Review, around the Rooney Rule, the NFL's diversity hiring policy. So my father passes away, and Paul Tagliabue, who was the commissioner of the NFL before Roger Goodell, and I had a couple meetings set up to sort of go through our plan on this project. And he said, you should expand this and talk about his time and labor. He had been the NFL's chief labor negotiator, and really was at the first meeting between labor players and owners in 1957. Talk a little bit about how he transformed the Steelers. We were really bad before the 70s, and then we talk about his time in Ireland, where eventually he was the ambassador of Ireland. So we tried to put together a story that talks about, answers the question, can you be a good person and win? And, I think there are plenty of warts and fumbles along the way, but I think my father overall did that in his career.
And the book is A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule, and Jim Rooney joining us here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Jim, one of the things that stood out to me in, looking at, the story of your father, looking at the story of the Steelers in general, is it always amazes me the stability of the organization. 3 head coaches over the course of decades, not years, decades. And I think that people overlook the fact of how important stability is in not just professional sports, but in any business where it feels like that your father, it was very important to him and your family, the character of people, the quality of the people, and having stability in an organization like the Steelers.
My father always used to say, Josh, that the one thing you never want to do in business is confuse people. And there's going to be change, there's going to be difficult circumstances, but don't you as the organization confuse them. So, we believe in that stability and that continuity. If you look at my father's hiring process, he hired 3 guys and they've been with us for over 50 years, 3 different guys. It was a very determinative process. He's very deliberate. He took longer probably than most other teams do. I remember the Cowher hire took almost a month and a half. The hire with Mike Tomlin, took I think 2 or 3 weeks longer than everyone else. So, he took his time, but it was to get the right person so you could do the things you wanted to do, as we said, over that long period of time.
Jim, I know also that, and I love this story about how passionate your father was. I believe the one quote you used was about how, you look at the fans as neighbors. You don't look at them as numbers. And I know I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I think it's so important because in today's world, so much of life is about, people don't look at people as human beings anymore. They don't look at athletes sometimes as human beings. They look at them as robots. And it's so refreshing to hear that for as passionate as Steeler fans are, that the Rooney family actually cares about the fans so much.
Well, they are our neighbors. That's who we live with here in Pittsburgh, and I think the same is true in any place. You talked about the players. Casey Hampton was a nose guard of ours and weighs, probably close to 400 pounds. And, my father was this, 5'8" white dude. And the two of them together, they had this laugh. He would come up and give him this big hug. I can give you 1,000 examples, but it was just so, the difference between them was so obvious. But, Casey, when my father died, he was one of the people that's just most upset. He called, all the people in my family. There was just this way he touched people. And the same, I think, was true of the fans. My father, until the end of his life, he lived about 1.5 miles from the stadium, and he walked to every game. And he loved talking to them. He loved joking with fans from the other team, giving them a hard time, about their team. And, he treated them like you would be in a sports bar. And, that's just who he was. And, we talk about culture and leadership. My father was authentic. So everyone believed him and everyone trusted him. And it was fun. And, the things we're talking about being a neighbor, but it also worked in business because he was a trustworthy person.
Jim, one of my favorite stories, if you could retell it here just for a moment for the audience, is how Dan Rooney was a part of the city of Cleveland getting the Browns back after Modell moved that team to Baltimore to become the Ravens, and how the Browns came back to Cleveland. Can you retell that story?
Sure, and I think that goes to your last question about the fans. My father was in Cleveland every year of his life from 1948 until 1995 when the Browns left, and Clevelanders are like Pittsburghers, and they're like folks in New Jersey. They're hardworking, sort of blue collar. We use the term blue collar folks, and he just felt Art Modell was a friend of my dad's, and he said, Art, this is wrong. We shouldn't be doing this to any city, but especially these places where these organizations are institutions. I mean, they're the really the most important thing in these cities, and so there was a lot of animosity between my dad and Art for much of the ending year lives, which was sad because they were close before that. But my father said, "Hey, look, this is the right thing to do." And Roger Goodell actually was the league guy who was a young guy back then, and working on, getting the stadium financed, working with the state of Ohio, finding a new owner, which ended up being Al Lerner, from MBNA Bank, and building this whole thing back up. And it just was important to him for. As you said, the people in all of the NFL cities, not just Pittsburgh, were important, and he just felt it was robbing them by tearing a team out like that.
The book is A Different Way to Win, Danny Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule, and Jim Rooney joining here on 97.3 ESPN. Jim, speaking of the Rooney Rule, I'd be remiss not to have you on and ask about the changes to the rule that came through this week, and the sense that your father's legacy, obviously is in a lot of areas of football, but also how he cared about people. I think it has a lot to do with the Rooney Rule. And to me, I always thought of the Rooney Rule more than just a rule, but just a general principle of treating people the right way.
Absolutely, Josh, and I appreciate that. I mean, that's what he tried to do, but he also felt he had an obligation of doing it in the workplace. The Steelers drafted more players from the historically black colleges and universities from 1969 to 1978 than any other team. That team goes on to win more games, win more Super Bowl championships than anyone else. And that was sort of the proving ground of these ideas, that if you do things that are different, you go to pools of talent that other people aren't going. Not only is it sort of the right thing to do, but you can create a real competitive advantage. So he built a business around, like we're saying, trying to step out and be in the forefront of treating people well, of understanding that dignity and respect for people that are your customers, but like we're saying, are also your neighbors, is a good thing to do, and it's also good business. And again, we can show where he did that. And I'm happy to talk more specifically about the Rooney Rule this week, but that's certainly one of those cases. And he really changed the conversation for all of corporate America with the Rooney Rule.
Yeah, let's dig a little bit more into it. What is your perspective on the expansion of the rule, and how do you think that impact is going to not just help those who may not have gotten opportunities? One guy's name gets brought up a lot in our area, for example, is Deuce Stanley. He's been a running back coach here for a long time. Doesn't get a lot of interviews. He gets overlooked a lot. So, how does the expansion of this rule help, for example, someone like Deuce Stanley moving down the road?
Yep. And Deuce was a Steeler at the end of his playing career, and I think he'd be a fantastic head coach. In terms of what happened this week, So you had you had some good things, and so you increased the head coaching requirement from 1 to 2 in the pool, and that's so important because all of this science, you hear this word nudging around, but all the science sort of on how our minds work demonstrates, all the data shows if you have more than one candidate, if you have 2 or more in the pool, that unconscious bias gets broken down by an exponential effect, and the outcomes are much greater. So that was a positive step. We inserted the Rooney Rule into the coordinator and the assistant coaching positions, as well as some of the lower level scouting positions. So now that pipeline, there's always this question: is there a pipeline? Are there enough guys like Deuce out there? And so now you're driving towards having a greater pipeline. And then throughout all of the offices in an NFL team, the accounting, PR, et cetera, there's a Rooney Rule. It's not only for minorities in those cases, but for women as well. So hopefully, you're changing the entire culture. So I think that's a real positive. What we didn't get to this week is this idea of an enforcement mechanism. And, somehow I think you have to get there because you don't want to keep having sham interviews. You really want to get to the point where people are not only saying, hey, here's all the good things we're going to do, but they're doing them, and they're doing them with, sincerity and efficacy.
And you mentioned having the more interviews, the better. Even here in Philadelphia, Doug Peterson wasn't the first or the second choice. He was technically the 4th interview in the Eagles process before they even hired a head coach. So there is a strong importance that sometimes the person who is expected to be the number 1 choice may not even be the best choice for an organization.
Well, and Doug's done a fantastic job, and Jeffrey Lurie was on the original Rooney Rule committee with my father, and just showed tremendous leadership there. Same with Mike Tomlin. We had a very long process, as I described earlier. We started with 37 candidates, and Mike was on the original 37, but really nowhere near what we expected. And you go 37, 12 down to 4. Mike's in those last 4. And my father just spent so much time with him, and being able to spend that much time and getting to know him and his values beyond X's and O's, is what got him the job. So you're absolutely right. The more the more you carry out the process effectively, I think the better chance you have of getting someone that you may not have expected, but can be a Doug Peterson or a Mike Tomlin.
The book is A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. Jim Rooney is my guest here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jim, before I let you go, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to end here. One of the things about A Different Way to Win is the fact that you mentioned it earlier. Your father was a good man, and I think that it shows itself in the fact of the quality of people he had around him in the organization, the head coaches the team has hired, the quality of character of the people the team goes out and drafts. Just talk a little bit about the importance of letting people know that you can be a good human being and still be a championship individual on and off the field.
Right, and I think that shows itself when times are tough. Chuck Noll, our first coach, won 1-13 in our first season, goes on to win 4 Super Bowls. From 1998 to 2000, Bill Cowher has 3 losing seasons in a row. My father sticks with him. Mike has had some challenging situations, but it's getting into those messes with them, being part of their difficulties and working with them to get through that I think really is something that I don't know if it's unique in our culture, but it's special in our culture, that my father never looked at it as someone else's problem. He looked at it as our problem, and he worked with these guys together to try and make sure the vision was what we all wanted the vision to be, and then work through whatever the circumstances were that were getting in your way. And you see that created a lot of wins and a lot of championships over the years.
I know a lot of people are going to be wanting to hit the beaches this summer, so a great opportunity to do something while you're on the beach is the book, A Different Way to Win, Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. The author, Jim Rooney, and his all guests appear today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Jim, I really appreciate your time today.
Josh, thank you so much, and everyone in Atlantic City, stay safe. We really appreciate the chance to be there.
Absolutely, and of course the book. Listen, you're trying to stay safe. You're trying to maybe social distance. Why not grab a book? A Different Way to Win. Dan Rooney's story from the Super Bowl to the Rooney Rule. Author Jim Rooney joined us here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. We'll wrap up the show coming up on the other side as we lead you up to the Sports Bash with Mike Gill here on 97.3 ESPN. Just a reminder, still to come, Sal Palantonio joins Mike Gill coming up at 3 o'clock, and then football at 4. Andrew DeCecco, powered by InsideTheBirds.com. Football at 4 right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the free 97.3 ESPN mobile app, brought to you by First Bank of Sea Isle City. Final segment here on the warm-up. Josh Hennig hanging out with you here on 97.3 ESPN FM. Thanks again for Jim Rooney for joining the show. Very cool book conversation to have, obviously, with the Rooney Rule changes this week. Dan Rooney, a pillar of NFL history, huge part of a lot of the things we've seen in the NFL today. The Rooney Rule just being one small part of that. Text board is open, 609-403-0973. By the way, I'd be remiss. Just want to say hello. I have a buddy of mine who told me that the Sea Isle Beach Patrol loves listening to 97.3 ESPN. So for myself, Mike Gill, Hunter Brody, and all of us here, what's up, guys? Glad you're on board listening to us each and every day on 97.3 ESPN. For those who don't know, I actually lived in Sea Isle myself for over a decade. I actually lived on a house on 42nd Street that's no longer there. So literally the place that I lived in for my entire teen years is not even there anymore. So there goes the memories, right?